This is part two of a talk I gave at Binghamton University to a group of computer science majors in November of 2014. In this part of the talk, you'll learn about how a team can use Essence to assess where they're at, how they can do root cause analysis on a known problem, and you'll learn about how you can use patterns to improve the performance of your team.
So, one of the most powerful ways that this can help is in your reasoning. So now I just want to take a little time to talk about some of the games. So, one of the games that you can play with the cards is assessment poker. Is what's called not estimation. That planning poker is really estimation. This is assessment poker. And the way the team plays assessment poker is everybody's given a card deck, and you go through the alphas one by one, and the team thinks about each alpha and thinks about each state, and the team independently, each individual gets to the point. The way you play that game is you think about the checklists. And you go to yourself, well, yeah, we did this, yeah, we did this, yeah, we did this. Finally, you get to a checklist that we didn't meet. And as soon as you get to one you didn't meet, the state you're in is the previous state. The first state, you meet them all. So for each alpha, the team thinks, and then we go, are we ready? And when you say you're ready, everybody raise the card that, what the state you think we're in. And so it might be, I'll just pick one here. We're doing requirements, and so everybody raises requirements acceptable. But somebody doesn't raise that one because they think, well, they're not acceptable. Then we have a discussion. If everybody agrees we're in the same state, everything's fine. If we have a differing of opinion, it drives conversation. Why do you think we're in requirements aren't acceptable? Because they're still ambiguous. There's still a lot of issues we're dealing with. Are we working those issues? So you go through the states. One by one, you get the team to discuss the issues to reach agreement. And usually what you come out with is a set of actions. Because eventually the team agrees that this is an issue or it isn't. And you end up with a bunch of actions. So that's a great game you can play. There are some full courses now in Essence that are being run in universities. One down in Medellin, Colombia. But there's also Carnegie Mellon West is doing some of this. And a group of students were using Scrum in a pilot project out there. And they also brought in Essence, what they call reflections meetings, which is what they do as part of their retrospective. They pull out and they play the assessment poker game. And one of the comments that was made by one of the students when he was asked, did this help? He goes, well, the thing that was neat about it is he said, when we were just doing Scrum, the only thing we talked about is what we knew. In other words, you do the retrospective with Scrum, the team talks about, well, what are the issues that are getting in our way? And what do we need to do about it? So the whole conversation is about what you already know. And this student said, Essence helped us to think about and talk about the things we didn't know. Risk. Risk is uncertainty. So this is a big value here. It's making you aware of things to think about that maybe from your own experiences you haven't run into before, and you wouldn't think to ask the question without the help of the checklists. Another game that you can play with the cards is, what if you have a problem? Or, the first one is a general assessment. Suppose you have a specific problem. And this is one of our scenarios in our user's guide where this team is having trouble with a resistant stakeholder. And so they go, all right, how are we going to deal with this? Okay, let's bring out the cards, and let's see if we can use the cards in a way to help us do root cause analysis. And so where do you start? And what's interesting is and we've played this game. Think of any kind of problem that you might have in software and see how easy it is to pick one of the 7 alphas. Really hard to find a problem that you can't zero in on at least one of them. And usually, it frequently might be 1 or 2 of them. And it doesn't matter which one you start with. You can pick the other one. So they're having trouble with a resistant stakeholder. So it becomes pretty obvious. Let's start and look at where we are with the stakeholder alpha, right? And so they do this. And what happens, these are the stakeholder, the 6 states. And so they put the cards out, and they do the assessment poker just on stakeholders. And when they do this, the team agrees that they've got to the recognized state. And what recognized means is the stakeholder groups have been recognized. But the next state is represented. Do we have a stakeholder representative? This is good practice. You've got to have somebody representing you that can be there you can go talk to. They find out that there's no representative. So the first step is they got to get a representative appointed. Then the next state after represented is involved. So we got somebody represented, he's appointed, but he better get involved and be working with us. So they get him involved through interviewing. I mean, when they interview him, they find out that the reason this stakeholder is resistant, they actually get the guy involved who is resistant. He just doesn't see the value in the new system. There's a legacy system he's been using, and he loves it. It works for him. He didn't want to go to the new system. So then what this leads to is the opportunity, and then it leads to, I go to the opportunity, I got to establish the value, and then it leads to the software system demonstrable state, because we have to demonstrate to this stakeholder the value. So what you learn by this scenario is you learn how the team discussion leads you through a sequence of alpha states and across different alphas, stakeholder, 3 states, then opportunity, value established, then demonstrable. And what you learn is how it eventually gets you to the root cause and helps you to find it. Now, I mentioned earlier, this is one of the things that I think is really powerful. This is all natural language. It's not hard to figure this stuff out. You guys don't have to go take 300 hours of study and become a Lean Six Sigma black belt. But a lot of what Lean Six Sigma is about is for consultants to come in and do root cause analysis using all kinds of fancy analytical tools. And I like them. I actually use them in my business. So I'm not trying to knock that. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to kind of change the software industry here a bit. We're trying to shake it up to the point where a lot of the problems that consultants come in and deal with, teams can deal with better. And so this is a simple way for you to do your own root cause analysis. You don't need outside help. I think this is very powerful. So teams can also use activity spaces to self-assess. A simple way you do this, and you could just use what I call the 3-finger approach. And what it is you could walk through the activities and say, sort of like the same thing, the assessment, just to ask the team, how are we doing? And the 3-finger approach is we're doing lousy, we're doing okay, we're doing great. And we just raise our finger and say, how are we doing with respect to each of the activities? And then if you have a disagreement and you go, well, let's talk about it. Again, it gets the team into discussion. Here's a quick scenario from our user's guide where a team used this to assess the way of working. This is an example where a team was using Scrum, and there was a disagreement on the way of working that they had achieved. So they put the cards out, and there was one new person on the team, and the question was, have we established the foundation established state? And one of the checklists is key practices and tools ready. Well, the one less experienced team member didn't think that we had enough practices because they didn't feel confident or competent in doing their job. So they had the discussion, and when they went through the discussion, they learned that these are three of the activities, the generic activities from the way of working activities, from the activity spaces. They had the discussion, and the discussion led to, are we coordinating our activity? And they found out when they talked about that they, well, you know, we're really not holding our daily stand-up meetings as well as we should be. How about supporting the team? Well, one of the senior members said, well, the reason, talking to the less experienced person, the reason you're having trouble is I was supposed to get with you and bring you up to speed on our way of working, and I haven't had time. I've been busy. And so I really need to get with you and do that. And that's part of supporting the team. Track the progress. Are the teams tracking the progress like they said? Well, Agile teams do these burn-down charts. And the team said, you know, we're really not following our burn-down charts. So what this whole scenario led them to recognize is they actually did, they agreed they had achieved the foundation established, but the next state of way of working is in use. Okay, we have a foundation. We know our practices, but are we using them? The team agreed. We're not really using them as well as we should be. So they realized this is their next target. We've got to get better at doing what we said we were going to do. How could your team use the essence competencies? Analysis. These are the words for the analysis competency. This competency encapsulates the ability to understand opportunities and their related stakeholder needs and transform them into an agreed and consistent set of requirements. One of the things that this gets people to think about, you go into a lot of companies and they have people with the title analysts. And I see this, and a lot of them are like, they're tied into some tool. And a common one in big companies, a requirements doors tool, requirements, yes, they're doing traceability. And they're making sure all the traceability is there, but they're not talking to anybody else. And if you look at this competency, this is where the root of a lot of problems happens when we're making sure we have all this traceability, but are we making sure we're getting to the right requirements that meets the stakeholder needs and getting out and talking to the right people? It gets you thinking about that. Another one is stakeholder representation. And this is one of my favorite ones because I think I had the definition up before, but you really want to think about this definition. A competency that encapsulates the ability to gather, communicate, and balance the needs of other stakeholders and accurately represent their views. When I gave this talk in April, I remember this well, and it's on the YouTube. Merwin said that's a really good definition, and you guys really want to think about it. He goes, because a lot of people delegate it. I don't know if you remember saying that, and it's absolutely true. You shouldn't be delegating this unless you really make sure the person you're delegating it to is got the right skills to be a stakeholder representative. This is not about you just coming in and giving your opinion or listening. It's about you representing a group and balancing those needs and then working with the other stakeholders. This is probably one of the areas that most commonly when projects get in trouble, it comes back to they don't have appropriate stakeholder representation. Another thing you can do with the activity spaces is identify gaps and overlaps. And an example here, the team could ask, do we have a test practice defined? And the way the conversation should go is, do we have one? The answer could be yes or no, but then the next question is, if you don't, do you need one? If you have a bunch of testers who really are skilled and they know what they're doing, you may not need to make it more well-defined and documented. But if you have new testers coming in, you have new people, how do they learn? This is the kind of question you need to ask. You also need to ask questions on how we track progress. If you've moved to a new method like Scrum, are you still reporting progress using your old method and you have overlapping methods? Give you a little bit of my own research, my own thinking, and some different ways that I'm trying to move some of my own clients to think about how to use this model and how it might change their organization and how they interact. Where's the best place? Where can Essence help most? At the start of a project, at key points like retrospectives, and I ask, what about in between these points, like when things aren't going so well? A lot of people think that it's just for like at the retrospective. Okay? It's just that help me at the start, help me at the retrospective. But what about once you're in and you're involved? Well, people at first are thinking, well, I don't know how I'd use it there. And it's my view that this is probably the place where it might have the greatest value. I look at Essence like a referee in a good sporting event. And if in fact your project is going well, you don't want the referee to get in the way. You know, a good basketball game, the worst thing you want to see is the ref. He's making calls. It's a good game. He's stopping the game. You know, let him play if it's a good game, right? But when the trouble starts, you want the ref to be there to keep the game under control. And that's the way I like to look at this. If people, some people have said, you know, I think Essence helps in retrospectives, as we've talked, and at the start. But once we get going, I don't see where it helps. And the question I ask is, did you have any problems? If you didn't have any problems, it's doing the right thing if you don't notice it. But if you had problems, did you know enough? Like you had trouble with a stakeholder. Did you know enough to go back and look at the stakeholder health? So you want it to help you when you need the help. And this is an area that I think what I call patterns and practice slices can help. And I'll give you an analogy here. We've known for a long time that a good way to build complex software systems is to deploy them in small slices. Because if you do that, you get a little increment out. This is the Agile model. You get a little increment out, and you get people using it, and they give you feedback, right? Same thing for practice. Why doesn't this make sense for practices? Instead of having our practices in large volumes, how about small slices of them, deployed small pieces, so we can hear if they're helping developers? So another term that I like to use here is a pattern is just an abstraction of a common scenario with some related questions and tips. So I want to give a little more motivation for this, and then I'm going to give some examples. What do we traditionally do? This is the motivation. What have we traditionally done? You go into big companies, and your guys are going to, when you graduate from here, you go out, you get a job. Actually, hopefully you won't. We will have changed this by then. But the way it's been, for a large part of the last 40 years, you go in, especially the bigger companies, and they give you what I call the stone tablets. And it's here's all the documentation on how we do software. And part of this is necessary because you have to learn the way they do software. But I view that there's a different way. I think there's a different way to look at this. I think, what if organizations viewed their software practitioners not as people that come in and we're telling you what to do, but we want to view you as customers. You're the customer of our practices because you use them. And if you turn it around and you think of it that way, then the practices become a vehicle to help practitioners perform better. So we're using them to give you what you need. And I think most people want to get there, but the big conflict comes in with regard to how much control to give the practitioners. In what we've done in the past is what I call the extreme heavyweight processes, where we give you this heavyweight documentation. And where this came from is we're trying to define, we're trying to document and tell you what to do with every step of the way. That doesn't work. It just, because first of all, even if we could, which we can't, even if we could define all the things you had to do with every situation you face, you wouldn't be able to find what you need when you need it. And that's what happens with a lot of these large heavyweight processes. The other extreme that we see in companies is they go to the other extreme. This is kind of the reaction with the agile movement to the point where there's no documentation, or the documentation is so light that it's useless because it tells you things you learned in school, and it was the first thing you learned in school, like do requirements before design, do design before code, do test. You know this stuff. So this is not useful. What you really need falls in between these two. And there's two types of information that I think people need. And there's the basic practice information on things like how to conduct the practice, the competency needs, and the checklists to prepare. And these can be, we're actually with Essence, we're coming out with guidelines for how you can take the alphas and build simple practices and have another card deck that sits on top of this card deck. But this is what you need as a beginner. And what we've done in the past, what most companies do is they focus all their effort on just defining the practice, which is you only need when you're first a beginner. Once you're out there executing, what you really need is guidance in what to watch out for when you're conducting it. What are the warning signs? And what options do I have? This is where patterns can help. So just some quick examples of this. Have you heard of user stories? Anybody heard that? You heard that term?
We just touched on it as part of the Agile.
So user stories is an agile way to document requirements. And what I've done here is I'm showing, again going back to my view of software developers should be viewed as the users. You're the stakeholders for the practices you're going to be given when you go out to develop software. So I've come up with some user stories that I get from talking to real software developers for where's the pain, where's the trouble, where do they need help. Example, as a software developer, and this is the form that you write user stories in. It's a well-accepted one. And you say, from the perspective of the user, I want something so that. It's very good information because you find the requirement on what you need and you know why he wants it. Because that helps a developer, when you're developing something, get the motive behind it. So as a software developer, I want more guidance in what I should do when I don't understand a requirement so I can build the best software to meet my customer needs and meet team commitments. Another one, as a software developer, I want to know what to do when my testing is taking too long and I'm getting pressure from my manager to finish. And these are real scenarios I run into when I go into, this is what I hear from software developers. As a software developer, I want more help in how to handle a design risk when the alternatives are going to extend the schedule and I am getting pressure to finish on time. So those are just some examples. Now to complete the pattern, there's the need. To complete the pattern, you need what are the related questions teams should ask, and what are the options that you have. And what my rule is, I've got my own ideas on this, but each company should talk to their experts and come up with their own list of here's the questions to ask and here's the options. And you build your own patterns. By the way, we're also coming out for guidelines for how to write patterns. So you can have practices that sit on top, which you would get the card deck of practices when you first go into a company that says here's the basic practices. But then you'd get another card deck, which is here's the patterns. Use these when you're executing. These are the warning signs. These help you with the options on how to handle the tough situations. So just some examples of the questions. If I don't understand a requirement, so you ask some questions. Okay, I don't understand a requirement. Is your stakeholder working with you? Maybe the stakeholder doesn't understand the requirement, but if your stakeholder is collaborating and you're moving forward, you might be fine. But if your stakeholder is not working with you and you have a fixed cost and schedule, you better raise a risk. So that's an example of the guidance for requirements. And what about if your testing is taking too long? All right, testing is taking too long. Your manager's coming down saying you've got to finish on time. All right, what am I going to do? Well, can I test at a higher level? Do I need to do all the low-level testing? If I do that, what are the risks? Right? This comes back to your context. If you're in a critical, life-threatening environment where your software could kill somebody, you might not want to make those changes. What do your processes say? What do your guidelines say? Do your guidelines allow you, give you the options to make those decisions? So these are the kind of questions that you want to keep. These are the kind of patterns you want to keep aware of when you're actually out there in the trenches building your software. I got a design risk. What can I do? Well, I could call for a peer review, but maybe I don't have time to do that. How about just talk to a colleague, bring some key people, pull them in together? So some of this may appear obvious, all right? It's that in the heat of battle, when you're out there, we frequently forget the obvious. And this goes back to the point that we get into trouble when we make poor decisions. I've been reading a book, just kind of to conclude this. I've been reading a book just recently, and I don't know if you've heard of this, it's just out. It's by a fellow by the name of Peter Thiel. He wrote a book called 0 to 1, just out this year, Notes on Startups or How to Build the Future. I highly recommend this. This week, I got to chapter 12, which is the best chapter. It's on man-machine interface. This guy, Peter Thiel, was the co-founder of PayPal. And he states in the book, he says, is that there's an insatiable appetite in companies for data. They're thinking that data means more value, get more information in. But one of the things that this guy talks about in chapter 12 is that computers are good at finding patterns, but they can't hold a candle to people in terms of finding insight from patterns and making good decisions. And the analogy he gives is that there was a story about a supercomputer from Google that in 2012 got rave reviews because it was able to go out and look at 10 million images on YouTube, and it was able to, with 75% accuracy, identify a cat. And that sounds impressive until you realize a 4-year-old can do it 100% of the time, flawless. So the point, there's a very big point here, and I'm going to bring back to the analogy. His point is, we shouldn't be trying to use computers and computer technology so much to solve hard problems as to help people solve hard problems. And, bringing it back here to this process stuff, my analogy is kind of the same. What companies have done with these big processes is we've treated people like computers. And these processes, this documentation we give are like the instructions to you. You're a computer, just follow the instructions. It hasn't worked. Patterns is a way to help you help yourself, to help you gain the insights on your projects as developers and help you make better decisions. And that's what we're trying to do with Essence, and that's what I'm trying to do to move the industry to less focus on process and more on patterns. Finish on time, even if I'm in the middle of my slides.
Very nice. Thank you, Paul.
Yep.
So, see what you, of how you apply this to your, academic experience, work experience, previous experience. That's one. In addition, the second part is, so again, you're not going to even have room to just tell me what he said, And don't even try and do that, Apply it. And the second one is, what I want you to do is, we've learned the processes and disciplines for project management, this semester. This is a different and more powerful application of that. relate essence to what we've been talking about this semester. Okay? Tell me your thoughts on how it relates. All right.